Let's look at the parts of the rope making machine. I made this back in 2000 and dubbed it the Rope-O-Matic 2000. It starts with the base, and this is for a 3-strand rope. On the back side, all of the hooks are tied together, so when I turn one crank, it turns all 3 hooks at the same time, and I've got directional arrows showing which way to turn it. The next part is the base, and the base has a old brace and bit for drilling holes on it. So the main head will spin in one direction. For the double strands, the drill will bind those together in another direction. So I've just got this brace and bit, and this would be the part that you would press down if you were drilling a vertical hole. That's in a wooden base. On here I've got the essentials, the twine for whipping the ends, some scissors, a knife to cut the end of the rope. When you make the rope, you typically make the rope initially 25% longer than it needs to be because it shortens considerably as you go. And this base, I'll tip it on its side here so you can see the ends are like ski sleds, because as this is standing upright, there would be weights back here and would allow it to slide across the ground, across the concrete slab, across my gravel driveway. And if I don't put weights on the back, it simply wants to tip over. So the weights, put the weight in the back, and as you use it, it just slides. This device keeps the 3 strands separated, and you'll see that when it's in use. I typically use baler twine. That's exactly what this is. Just a plain old sisal baler twine. It's in a bucket with a hole so I can feed it out easier. It's easier to manage. So those are the parts of the rope making machine. This is the process we use for making rope. Tomorrow kicks off Labor Day weekend, but it's still very cold here. We've got at least 3 more nights where we could have a frost. I want to shoot this later in the day because every time one of these hens lays an egg, they have to announce it to the world, and it gets pretty loud. So we're in between the chicken coop and the garden. Not much planted because it's still cold and early, except for strawberries. We got those in. So this is a brace and bit, just a drill, old drill. I've taken the chuck off so I could put a hook in its place for the rope. And on the other end we have a stationary device, Big Red, the tractor, and that has the other end of the rope making device on it. Now this, as I mentioned earlier, spins in one direction, whereas the drill will spin in another direction when we start making the wraps. So the first thing we need to do is get the twine from this drill to all the hooks and back, and that's why this is called rope walking, because you have to keep walking back and forth and back and forth. Now we're only going to make a 20 foot rope, but this base sits at 25 feet because it's going to shorten those 5 feet while we make it. Again, the nose is cut like a sled so it slides, and so it doesn't tip over. We just stick some ballast on it. So the next step is going to be running the sisal or the binder twine hooks, hook to hook, back and forth before we start wrapping. All right, we're going to start by tying the binder twine to the hook, and from there you'll see I've got a bucket with the twine that feeds out real nice, and from there I'm going to walk that's why it's called rope walking. So we'll have 2 strands to the first hook, strands to the second hook, and 2 to the third hook, so there's a total of 6 strands. Then we'll cut our rope or our strand and tie it onto the hook. Now the goal here is to keep all of the 6 strands at approximately the same tension. We don't want a loose strand and a tight strand. The rope will be crooked and uneven, so we want them to be all fairly tight. So there you can see the strands of the rope all in place, all going back to the tractor. The next step is to begin winding. And we'll start putting twists in these 6 strands. So the question is, when do you know you're done? And we also have to keep them separated. They do like to bunch up. We have to pull these strands apart so they don't get bunched up. So the way to know when you're done is your lays, your twists should end up at about a 45-degree angle. If you get too tight, the rope will start to knot upon itself, or the strands will knot upon themselves, and you've gone too tight. We have to keep these unbound, so every so often you have to stop. Keeps doing it. There we go. Alright, we have to pull again. My assistant's going to walk down the rope and unconnect the twists that are forming. Alright, now I'm going to pause here and walk to the other end and correct the twists. Alright, now we've got enough twists in the rope, and now we're going to go back to the other end. And as you can see, the rope is shortening, so our sled didn't slide. as I'd hoped. That just means we needed more ballast back here to keep it from doing that. All right, on this end, what I've got is this divider, and it will keep the strands while I'm twisting from bunching up on each other, but it's the next step in the rope making process. I can add a weight to the bottom if I'm working alone to keep this down, but the next step will be twisting this drill in this direction to bind the strands together. So my assistant will do that while I hold this block. And she's going to go nice and slow. And you can see the rope laying on itself. And if I let go of this block of wood, it would try to rocket itself forward just from the sheer twists. So now again, if I let go, you see how this will twist by itself? So I'm going to move the sled and make some turns on the other end of the hook. I'll come to this end and add a few more twists, because as we're winding the 3 wraps on top of each other, it just helps keep the rope tight. You don't want a tight rope on each end, but saggy in the middle. All right, my assistant is going to turn the crank slowly, and I'm going to let this move forward. And again, we want these lays to be at about 45 degrees to one another. At this point, to save time, we've completed all of the wraps that are needed, and we're down on this. This is as long as we can go, but as you can see, our rope is very hairy and fuzzy and needs a haircut. So my assistant will hold the camera while I give the rope a burn with a torch. And while I burn it, I can twist the rope and then use a leather glove, don't do this barehanded, to raise any other fibers that are on here. You just don't want a hairy rope. You can do this with a torch, newspaper, whatever flame you want to use. It doesn't have to be a LP or MAP gas torch. The next step is to whip the end of the rope. So I've cut a length of twine of about 18 inches. We're going to leave a tail stick out, then a loop, and then we're going to start wrapping around itself. And as you do this, you want to keep it tight, and you want to have more than one diameter of the rope. 2 would be nice. And then we're going to make a disappearing knot that can't come untied, that will be underneath these wrappings. So now we'll pass it through here, and then we're going to pull the tail end, and then we're going to disappear that knot underneath the wraps. Then we're going to cut the excess, and then we'll go down and do that to the other side as well. Again, we'll make a little loop. We'll leave enough tail sticking out that we can grab a hold of. We'll start wrapping on top of itself. Two times the diameter of the rope allows that loop and the knot to disappear inside. Some people will just tie a knot in the end of the rope to keep it from fraying or unraveling. This is a little cleaner. The last step in fusing or whipping the end of this rope would be to dip the rope end, the twine that we just did, in paint. Just common house paint is fine, and let it hang. Alright, the next step is going to be to cut the rope, and we're going to cut it long because we're going to chop it. And we'll go to the other end and do that. So the next step is chopping the rope closer to the end of the whipping. That's one end. That's the other end. I'll show you what they look like. And that is the amount I want to keep out, and I'm going to let it splay out a little bit because when I dip this in paint, that'll keep this whipping from ever sliding off the end of the rope. So here is the 20-foot section of rope all wrapped up. I purposely left these tails sticking long because the next step I'm going to do is dip them in paint, and then I can hang the rope from the end while the paint dries. Alright, I'm back in the shop. So we will dip the whipped end into some paint. That'll fuse everything real nice. We'll do the other side. And then this will be allowed to just hang and dry, and then that should never ever come undone.